My name is Bill. If you got that message, we are recording this. So thank you, Mark Zarnecki, for setting the record button on. So for those of you that are participating, my name is Bill Cedarberg, and I've been asked by Sarah and others to kind of MC and be the timekeeper for this conversation this morning. As many of you know, this whole project about broadband started 5.5 years ago for this region when Jack Cecil came back from Raleigh and said, can we do something like they're doing in the Triangle related to the expansion of Gig U? And today we have Blair Levin, who is one of the presidents of Gig U, and he'll be on the program talking in a minute about the national scene. But out of that has grown a number of initiatives. And one of them is the West Next Generation Network that Sarah Nichols is working on and leads as part of the Land of Sky Regional Planning Council. The other is the Western North Carolina Broadband Project, which is part of WNC Asheville, and that I, Stagg Newman, and others are participating in. And we have a number of students from UNCA today that are helping with that. Now, our goal this morning is to have a practical, candid conversation about broadband in Western North Carolina. And we have a phenomenal group of experts to talk about that. And my role again is to police this, keep the time, keep us on time, and keep the parade moving down the street. We'll have lots of opportunities for conversation and questions. Please use the chat option on the Zoom screen to register your question, and either Sarah or one of our UNC students will moderate that and will enter with the question. So let's get this parade underway. Our first presenter is Stacy Hughes. Stacy has been with the Dogwood Foundation for a little over a year. She joins us from the state of New York. Stacy is a program officer, and I'm impressed. She has dual responsibilities, healthcare and broadband, and has been a phenomenal assistance to us as we've tried to navigate broadband here in Western North Carolina. So Stacy, we're delighted to have you with us. And I could go on with more accolades, but let's keep this moving. So Stacy, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Bill. I'm just going to try to explain kind of philanthropy's position on broadband and how we kind of navigate funding. Dogwood Health Trust, as Bill mentioned, is a very new philanthropy in Western North Carolina. And I emphasize very new because we are still evolving. We're still putting together our strategies. We're still putting together our processes. So forgive us if we don't have a solid, broadband plan at this point. But what we've been doing is basically trying to fill as many broadband gaps we can, given the legal parameters we are required to work within. And I'll get into those in just a minute. But it is very difficult to fund a broadband project from our perspective. We're moving toward, our vision is to move toward more strategic giving. And what that kind of means is we would try to find larger efforts that involve multiple partners covering large parts of our 18-county footprint in Western North Carolina. As we try to fill area broadband gaps, we would align our giving within our 4 strategic pillars or 4 strategic priorities. And those are education, health and wellness, economic opportunity, and housing. That said, we consider most applications that satisfy charitable need and that have a partner who is tax exempt. So those partners would include schools, charities, governmental entities, anyone who has a charitable purpose and is considered a charitable entity. The application process at Dogwood is quite easy. There's a link on the face of our website. I'll get to that slide in just a second, but there's a link on the face of our webpage. You just click the link and it brings you to the pre-application process. We vet the pre-application for charitability. We ensure that that people were going to put through to full application are 501(c)(3)s or charitable entities. So you don't have to worry, we'll vet it in the beginning, and that will begin a conversation with us. So feel free to use that process to, if you have an idea, if you want to have a conversation with us, use that pre-application process to do so. So what we have to navigate through is charitability. The IRS requires us to only fund charitable purpose or relieving government burden. I won't get into that too deeply because it really is complicated, but basically I'm going to go through the items in the IRS language that we can and probably would fund. So relief of the poor and distressed or underprivileged, advancement of education or science, lessenings of the burdens of government. And that's not burdens of government that we just make up in our heads. There actually has to be a burden that the government identifies. So we can't just kind of go, hey, that fits into this category. And then we have a very strong equity focus. So eliminating prejudice and discrimination will also fall under our vision. And I'm going to read this to everybody because I say it in a lot of my conversations about broadband, but this is exact language from the IRS. Expanding internet service is not among the enumerated exempt purposes, nor would it be considered within the general legal understanding of charity. So we can't say, hey, this is a great project, we're going to bring broadband to a whole community. We just can't fund projects like that. Government burden, like I said, is something we'll determine with the governmental partner. Even with that kind of difficult barriers that we have to overcome, we've been able to fund 5 projects in our short term that we've been in business. And just some examples of those, we've worked with Land of Sky quite a bit. We helped with marketing for the broadband survey. We helped fund a mapping tool. Let's see, these are listed here on the page. I won't get into them too deeply, but during COVID, we were extremely concerned with kids that are left behind because they don't have broadband access, don't have access to broadband or the internet. And we funded some projects that helped out some underprivileged children, some school kids. So we're also working right now with NC State's Institute for Emerging Issues. We're trying to come together on a partnership there. This is a very exciting project because it covers all 18 counties, and it will help provide some planning documents for each county. So that one we're still working on, is not approved, but hoping that we'll see more efforts like that come to us. Those are the types of things we can fund and want to fund. So I'm going to stop talking now and leave it open for questions.
Okay, everybody, here's an opportunity to quiz down a major funder here in the region.
And I want to remind everyone, speaker view is kind of the best way to experience this. If you've got questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box. We'll be filtering them and sending those to Stacy. But I think one that I get a lot, Stacy, is from, I think, most of our local government's perspective, everything in broadband is considered lessening the burden of government. That they would consider their emergency communications or school children, et cetera. And I know that previously, if things were going directly to a provider, that was where we really got, we hit those rules. So could you kind of talk us through what parts of a deployment project Dogwood may consider versus what is a non-starter?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Sarah. So, and we've sort of navigated this together on a few projects, but if at the end of the day, the beneficiary of our dollars is a for-profit entity, let's just use Charter or Spectrum, AT&T, if they're going to benefit at the end of the day. For example, if someone came to us and said, we don't have broadband in this community, we need it. It's mostly poor people, you know, they're underprivileged. But at the end of the day, the subscriptions are going, you know, there'll be internet subscriptions, full price, that those for-profit entities will benefit from. We cannot fund that. If there is a cluster of school children that the local school is sponsoring, getting internet and devices to them, that's something we can consider. And I'm being very careful with my words here, because even if it looks like a grand slam home run, we often have to bring in a tax attorney and consult with them to see if we can fund these projects. These are very tricky. And that's, I think, why you don't see a lot of philanthropies funding these types of projects, because it's hard. And you know, it's time consuming, but we know that there's a gap in Western North Carolina, and we want to try to help fill it. So we're happy to do the extra work to try to get these projects going. Did I answer your question? I hope.
Yes, and I know that
Okay.
we've worked on that a lot. Here's one. Does Dogwood have a different concept of broadband other than the federal minimum of 25.3?
No, we don't even
Okay.
right now. That's not a consideration in our minds. I mean, we wouldn't want to fund something that is outdated, and, you know, by the time we get the check to the entity. So, you know, we would want to make sure that it's sound, you know, kind of technology. But I really, especially at this point in our, you know, tenure, I don't think we're going to get into, you know, what kind of technology is this, and, you know, how long is it going to last? We might ask those questions, but it's not in the forefront of our minds.
Stacy, you've made passing reference to your conversations with the Institute for Emerging Issues. And that, I think, would be a major interest to the people listening in on this and participating on what is the status of that. And that is something that's region-wide, as I understand it, and fits into the strategy that I think Sarah and Paul will be talking about a little bit later. Could you share a little bit more on what the IEI is up to here in this region and your participation in it?
Yeah, I could share a little bit on that. I don't want to share too much, but it is basically a planning effort. So each county would be able to put together a planning document. It has been submitted to us, and it is under consideration with our various levels of leadership, including the board. So we're excited about this grant because it is a more strategic type of grant. It is the type of grant that covers our entire footprint. It's a wonderful partner, as you all probably know. The folks there are doing wonderful work in this space, and we're excited at the possibility of partnering with them. So it's an overarching regional approach with participation by each individual county, which, you know, those are our very important partners. So we're excited about it. Does that answer your question, Bill? I don't mean to dance around it too much, but since it's not.
I think Sarah will be talking about that maybe a little bit.
Okay, great.
Et cetera. But I think that's something that is going to be a major initiative here in the Western region over the coming year. So.
I've got one more for you, Stacy. This one comes from Nate Denny, who we're going to hear from here in a little bit, but he's asking, would hotspot service be an eligible use? And he's saying that one of the challenges the state has is that they've funded a bunch of hotspots, but not the actual subscription service. We hear that from our local schools as well. And I know that Dogwood got into sourcing hotspots on the front end.
We did, and that was really a response to COVID need. That would be one where I think we'd be calling our tax attorney, you know what I mean, to see, because the subscriptions are difficult for us to fund, given that those dollars would likely go to a for-profit entity. And while there are nonprofit entities providing middle mile in our 18 county footprint, it doesn't count as a charitable or governmental entity. So we can't fund those directly. I tried that one already. We kind of, I hate to say it like this, but bring it on and let's consider it. Don't be shy. I'm just trying to give you an idea of our parameters and what we have to work through, but we're happy to work through it. We want this expanded. We work with the councils of government, we work with the individual governments. We know that this is a gigantic gap here. We want to try to help.
Do we have any other questions for Stacy? If not, I do have one that's a little bit off broadband, and you may want to not answer this question. Susan Mims is the current interim president. There's questions as to, is there going to be a search for a permanent president? Is Sue going to move up into that role? Or what can you tell us about the leadership changes that are likely to occur at Dogwood, and what does the future hold as far as the structure of Dogwood?
I did not study those talking points, Bill, before this meeting, but yes, that will be opened back up. There'll be a national search and Susan will be in the running for that position.
Has she decided to be a candidate?
That's the impression I'm getting, yes.
Yeah. Good. Any other questions for Dogwood? This is a very well-behaved group here this morning.
And thank you for that.
Thank you, Stacy, for your presentation. Just a note that we have a number of dignitaries that are participating, but also signing on to the program as guests. One is Barbara Volk, who is the mayor of Hendersonville, and Barbara's been with us right from day one in this whole broadband project. So Barbara and Mayor, thank you for joining us. We also have president of AB Tech, John Gossett, who has been a strong advocate for broadband, first in McDowell County and now in his new role as president of AB Tech. So John, welcome. I must say, John is also a phenomenal golfer, so that's an exciting aspect to that. Terry Wells, County Commissioner for Buncombe County, who's been so active and instrumental in leadership in the rural parts of Buncombe County. We have Commissioner McCall online from Transylvania County. Welcome. Commissioner, get the right name here. Wechtel from Madison County, who has been involved in this for the last 3 or so years. So welcome everybody. So we have a lot of VIPs. Over the last 5 years, we've involved over 500 people. And just in preparation for this, I went back and I looked at, and these emails add up. Just if you ever want to do something like this, over this 5-year time period, I've had on my machine 2,571 emails related to broadband. And out of that, I say, where have we gotten to? But at any rate, it's been fun. And thank you, leadership, for being here today and participating. Without any further questions of Stacy, let's keep the parade moving and call on Nate Denny. Nate is with the state office and will have a presentation on the state of affairs for the state of North Carolina. I was asking Nate earlier about his new role. As of July 1st, Nate is the new director as the Deputy Secretary of Broadband and Digital Equity, appointed by Governor Cooper. Before that, he was Chief of Staff and Legislative Liaison for the North Carolina Department of Information Technology. And Nate, welcome. We're glad to have you here, and I think you have some slides to show, and I'll turn it over to you, Nate.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the introduction and really appreciate the chance to be here today. Paul, are you popping up the slides? I can do them if I need to. There we go. Excellent. And before I dive in here, I just want to say it's a very impressive broadband email count. I should note that I think that I've got about that many from former Senator Terry Van Dyne, who's on here, who really advocated really aggressively for broadband expansion during her time in the General Assembly. And so I want to thank her for her work on this issue. Yeah, let me jump into the governor's broadband plan. Governor Cooper has set a very aggressive goal for fully closing the digital divide in North Carolina over the next 4 years. We are going to do that with American Rescue Plan Act funds, of which the state is a beneficiary of a great many resources. You know, we have all seen, as this group knows, and I think I'm preaching to the choir here, that COVID has really laid bare the severity of the broadband problem, the breadth of the digital divide, and the disproportionate impacts of it. You know, the need to have multiple folks working from the home, and I got a poll pop up here. Multiple folks working from home, learning from home, trying to access telemedicine services, looking for jobs during the economic crisis tied to COVID, have placed a great deal of strain on households across North Carolina, particularly in rural parts of the state. And so while we have a unique crisis, we also have a unique opportunity with the level of funding that the state has received from the federal government. The governor proposed a plan that really has 4 major pillars. One is achieving full digital equity across the state. All of you, I assume, are familiar with that term, but it's really the notion that everyone in every community should have full access to the tools of the digital economy across demographic groups, across communities. And that is an underlying principle of this entire plan. The second major pillar is improvement of infrastructure so that the many North Carolina households that don't currently have access to high-speed internet can do so. You can't participate in the digital economy if you don't have high-speed internet. And I'm going to pause here and just say, and there's a question about speed earlier. When I say high-speed internet, I do not mean 25.3. I'm not talking about the FCC's definition of high-speed internet. I'm talking about something that will enable that full participation, the use of multiple services within a household by multiple members of the family. And that standard that we've set for this plan is actually 100 megabits per second download speed, 20 megabits per second upload speed, which I should note is consistent with the American Rescue Plan Act guidance from the federal treasury. The third pillar is affordability. All too many people have access to a connection at home, but can't afford the service. It's too expensive. And we know that that's a key driver against uptake, against subscription rates. And then fourth is digital literacy. 430,000 households in North Carolina don't have a home laptop or a desktop computer. Many of those don't even have a smartphone. And even for those who do have the hardware at home, they may not have the digital skills necessary to take full advantage, or may not even understand the relevance of the digital economy to their life. Paul, can you bump the slide forward, please? So to address all four of these pillars, we've set very specific goals, and that is to be the first of those to be a top 5 state for high-speed internet adoption, while making sure that everyone in the state has access to the infrastructure, that we close out the homework gap once and for all, that we make sure gains aren't felt just on average, but are realized by households across demographic groups as well, and to make sure that all of North Carolina's citizens have the tools and training needed to use the internet, use high-speed internet, and take advantage of its opportunities. Paul, next slide, please. Here are the specific metrics that the governor has set for this plan. We will get 98% of North Carolina households access to broadband internet speeds. And again, that's at that higher speed threshold of 120, not just 25.3. We will get to an 80% subscription rate by 2025. That's up from 73. And as we do that, we'll make sure that, again, those benefits are gained, that those improvements are gained across demographic groups. White households in North Carolina have subscribed at about a 76% rate, but of course, Native American, Black, and Latino houses subscribe at far lower rates. And so we want to get everybody up to that 80%, not just an average for the state. And then I mentioned the homework gap earlier. We want 100% of households with school children to have a high-speed internet subscription. The way we'll do that is a funding proposal that breaks down roughly across those 4 major pillars. Paul, can you jump to the next slide, please? There we go. This is a $1.2 billion investment. It's the largest single chunk of the state, the governor's plan for American Rescue Plan dollars in North Carolina. It's really a huge investment. And I should note, a lot of states are trying to figure out how to also use ARPA funds to close the digital divide. And from what we've seen, no state has proposed a more thorough, more ambitious plan than this one so far. That $1.2 billion is broken down into infrastructure, affordability, digital literacy, 3 of those 4 pillars, and that digital equity, that first pillar, is woven into each of these. The $1.2 billion starts with $600 million from the state's ARPA funds for infrastructure deployment over 3 infrastructure deployment vehicles. The first is what we call Great Grant 2.0. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Great Grant, which the General Assembly created 4 or 5 years ago. That's a program that awards about $15 million a year on average out of DIT's, yes, greater indeed, out of DIT's Broadband Infrastructure Office. We call it 2.0 because in addition to needing more resources, that Great Grant program needs some major policy tweaks to be as effective as we need it to be. First, it needs to be open to all counties in the state. When it started, it was just Tier 1 economically distressed counties. It's grown to Tier 2, and then in one round using or attempting to use CARES Act funds, it was Tiers 1, 2, and rural census tracts within Tier 3 counties as well. We know that counties, large and small, urban and rural, all have in some location have access problems in terms of infrastructure deployment. And we need every citizen of North Carolina to have access to coverage from the providers that participate in this program. We would also change the protest process for this program. Right now, individual providers can take pot shots at individual applications and say, I'll say in one example, your proposed project covers 2 households that we already cover with broadband speed internet, so you ought to kick it out. That takes up a huge amount of time, which is a real concern for us because, as I said, other states are trying to move quickly on this, and we need to to get money out the door and in the ground as quickly as possible, so that we can have access to labor, supplies, et cetera, et cetera. We also want to introduce affordability components to the GREAT grant. We would like to give a bonus points in that program for grant applicants that provide, say, a $15 a month service for low-income households across their coverage area. So a number of policy provisions, like I said, to make that GREAT grant process work better for the entire state. I will say that when the General Assembly created that, they made a very prescriptive statutory structure that doesn't leave a lot of room for flexibility or creativity. So we've paired that $350 million with $150 million for a more agile tool under DIT's procurement authority. We call this the competitive bidding program. And it will allow DIT and the state to work directly with counties to go out in areas where we think the market can respond more efficiently, to put out an RFP, a request for proposals, and say, look, we know that MCNC exists here. We know that there are several providers with assets or infrastructure here. We know that there are these resources, and the county might have gotten this funding from ARPA themselves. And yet there are 2,000 homes that still don't have access to high-speed internet. Do something a little more like the FCC's reverse auction approach, where we just say, look, who can cover it, right? We've got this need, who can do it, and for how much, and try a more competitive approach that is a little more flexible. The other flexible tool that we've included here is for stopgap solutions. This is a very broad use fund. The ARPA funds come with very specific goals for speed and technology. There's an explicitly stated preference for fiber in the ARPA funds, and again, a requirement of at least 100 megabits per second download, 20 megabits per second upload speed, and that must be scalable to 100 megabits per second up and down, symmetrical service. We know that we're not going to be able to get that level of service to every household in the state over the next 4 years. And so we need a pot of funding available to continue to fill gaps using a broader range of technology, everything from large fixed wireless or satellite projects to construction of an individual tower or repairs to an existing state-owned tower that might be leased by a provider to put out coverage, or even pole replacement, which is an issue that's gotten a lot of attention in this legislative session as we figure out who's going to pay for the cost to replace poles in support of large broadband projects funded by the FCC's RDOF program. So again, that's $600 million over those three main vehicles. I should note that that $600 million in state ARPA funding assumes an additional $900 million, both from the FCC's Rural Digital Opportunity Fund and private sector matches through the GREAT grant and competitive bidding process, for a total $1.5 billion spend on infrastructure over the next 4 years. That's it on infrastructure. I'll move quickly to affordability. We already touched briefly on the huge need across the state for access to cheaper service, and we know the barrier that subscription costs can present to an individual household in North Carolina. Fortunately, the CARES Act created a program under the FCC called the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, and I hope you're all familiar with it. I will put a link, or Angie Bailey, if you're on, if you could share a link with everyone to the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. It's a $50 a month subsidy for low-income households, SNAP eligible, other kind of defining criteria for low-income households. A $50 subsidy, and then $75 in tribal households for the subscription cost of broadband service. That is a $3.2 billion federal appropriation that we believe will move quickly. This $420 million is to extend for 180,000 North Carolina households that subsidy after the FCC's emergency broadband benefit runs out of money. I'll say two things about this. One, the current General Assembly does not appear to be interested in investing in a significant way in affordability programs or subsidies of any sort right now. So I think this is our toughest hill to climb with getting this fund appropriated. And as I should have mentioned at the front end, the state's ARPA funds have to be appropriated by the General Assembly. So we're working very closely with them to try and get this plan funded. Our hope is that in the absence, our hope is that the General Assembly will meet part of this obligation. And in the absence of that, we hope that the Congress will continue to invest in the FCC's emergency broadband benefit. The third major bucket is $165 million for digital literacy. This is device support, computers for low-income households, break-fix services for low-income households, taking advantage of North Carolina's excellent refurbishing community here that does great work getting refurbished computers, laptops into low-income households. And then other community partnerships, everything from investing more in the excellent WNC grants that were mentioned earlier, which is part of DIT's and many other entities' partnership with the Institute for Emerging Issues, but a partnership that doesn't currently get any state funding. From that to encouraging the development of innovative community hubs and kind of digital literacy and equity kind of locus points in a community where folks can come and take advantage of training and services. So those are the major substantive buckets. I should also note that the governor proposes $15 million for operational costs. Jeff Searle's team, the Broadband Infrastructure Office at DIT, has 10 FTE right now. And they really make miracles happen to get about $15 million a year out the door through the great grant process. The level of investment we'll need to close the digital divide once and for all will need a tremendous amount of additional capacity at DIT and with contract partners to deliver this program. And so, grant management, data analytics, a number of other capacities that we need to build within DIT to execute this plan. So that's the $1.2 billion plan. I am happy to take questions, although I think they will be directed toward the roundtable Q&A later. But thank you very much for the opportunity to talk through it with everybody.
Thank you, Nate, and congratulations on your new role. And I think maybe in the roundtable, we'll have conversation to answer the question about kind of your prediction of when the legislature is going to resolve some of these issues so that we know how we can proceed on these things. So think about that as we go. I also am remiss because in my notes, I was going to mention Terry Van Dyne as well, and you beat me to that. So Terry, welcome for joining us. We have a number of other dignitaries that are on the line that I should give a shout out to. Corey Atkins from the Asheville Chamber of Commerce has been with this project for a long time as an advisory committee member. Stag Newman, many of you know from our previous sessions, former FCC chief technologist is with us. Greg Voigt, from a former FCC attorney is with us. Walter Johnson, who is on a previous program, an FCC technologist, is with us. So there's a lot of significant people here. And so if I haven't seen your name on there, forgive me for not calling you out. So Sarah, am I right that we should move on to the next part and we'll get to the questions for Nate on the very practical things of how they're going to get a lot of money to Western North Carolina to help us do what needs to be done. So just think about that, Nate, how we can answer that. So Sarah, let's move on to the next part of our agenda, and that is to hear from Sarah Nichols and Paul Moon about the Land of Sky digital inclusion planning. that is going on. Sarah, as many of you know, is a regional planner with Land of Sky, formerly with Madison County, who was into the broadband issue at Madison County long before the rest of us were engaged in this issue. I must say that over time, I think we're all increasingly working for Sarah. And so I like to tease her about that, but she's really done an excellent job. And joining her at Land of Sky as a regional planner is Paul Moon. Paul was a newspaper reporter at Madison County before joining Land of Sky. And Paul, I understand today is your birthday. And so congratulations on, I'm sure, being 21 or 22 now. So we're welcome to have you. And Sarah, I'll turn it over to you and Paul.
Thanks, Bill. So Paul, could you pull up our story map? So we, the WNC program got mentioned a few times. We at West Engine were a part of a project called, the IEI had a tech cohort. And it was kind of our first, we felt like our whole initiative with broadband infrastructure was critical and important. But through our investment in time in that space, we realized that West North Carolina had some other issues, that it was not just a rural infrastructure issue. It was also people affording the service or having the skills they needed. And so as part of our transition in West Engine from infrastructure, broadening our umbrella into this digital inclusion space, we got into a tech cohort with IEI that kind of led us into a WNC award, which is what you're looking at right here. So we've been working on this digital inclusion plan for the region, 4 counties, and pulling a lot of data together. Digital inclusion broadly, it's affordable internet, you have access to it, you have a device that meets the needs, you have the training, tech support, and all the things that kind of make the whole ecosystem work. From some of our previous data, we were able to already tell this story, that 89% of, this is pre-pandemic, 89% of our people said that broadband was an essential service. I have a feeling that if we asked them now, that number would be even higher. And so out of that, back in January, we held a kickoff event where we brought in a lot of you guys attended that, participated, gave us information about what you're seeing in your communities, your organization, how this is impacting your ability to help people use all of these resources. We kind of scaled that down to these 3 visions, access to the internet, a low or no cost device, skills, training, and support to use all of those things. One of the things we did here is we took, this is American Community Survey data that was out, and we were able to show this plus a lot of other data we've collected over the last few years that rural areas, they definitely show up. This data is a little old. We've done a lot of work in this area of Madison County already, but you can look at it at a high level and see that a lot of the areas that are darker are kind of on the outskirts of our region, more rural areas. But then there's some things that caught our attention where it looks like there's some pockets in more urban areas that are just as red and have a lot of people in them. So we needed to look closer at what all of that meant and how it impacts our region in deploying these services. We pulled together some facts by county. We used our data from previous surveys. And then additionally, the state's been putting out more dashboards. We've been continuing to work with them on pushing out the broadband survey where we pulled a lot of this information from. And what's interesting is that at a county level, it doesn't always line up with at a census tract, which is one of the reasons we kind of advocate for not looking at this at a county at a county level. So things like the tier status, that is at a county level, but definitely this issue is at a much more micro level. This is a timeline of some of our work, getting started with 6 cities. Now we're in 4 counties, and definitely we work a much greater region. We partner a lot with the Southwest Commission, especially on their work. Mostly we keep saying that broadband providers don't look at it on county levels, and we don't need to look at it that way either, that these wires, the signal crosses all of those boundaries. So we've gone from 6 cities in an infrastructure, a lot of work along the way to where we're at right now. One of the things in this plan, last year, we started to do an inventory of digital inclusion assets. That survey is still up. The link is to the left and the bottom of this box, but you can click on these sites. So people self-reported things that they are offering at their organization. You can click one of the dots on here and it will pop up what that asset is. So in this case, it's a library system. What they offer at that library might be, let's see, hotspots or skills training at that. So we encourage you to use this and start to put in and propagate more, so that as people use this map and we say where there are gaps and where there are assets, we want to be able to send folks to them.
I'll come in here, Sarah. So as the vision statement outlined, we're really focused on connectivity, device access, and digital skills. So taking a closer look at the connectivity issue, our goal is to provide affordable connectivity options for all residents, businesses, and organizations and communities. So this map here shows the percentage of homes in each 4 counties that are considered unserved by any internet provider. These numbers may have improved since this data was first taken, but this gives you a broad understanding that, you know, anywhere from 1 in 10 to 1 in 5 homes, 1 in 4 homes in the region don't even have an option to connect to the internet. As this map shows, the darker areas are more rural, and that's where the higher concentration of homes without service are. But the ability to have the connection at a home is just part of being able to connect to the internet, and that that affordability piece is something that's really outlined in this second map that really digs down into different communities in the region. So if we take a look at some census tracts right here, the tract number 1, that is it's a community in Flat Rock, has the highest median income in Land of Skies region of over $100,000. If you take a look, everyone has a computer and just 10% don't have broadband service. You take a short drive to the East Flat Rock community and you'll see a very different picture. The median income is roughly a third of the highest census tract. It's also below the region's median income of around $50,000. Here we see about a quarter of homes don't even have a computer and nearly 50% don't have broadband service. Clearly, affordability is a part of that issue. And if you take a look at the demographics, 1/3 of homes identify as Hispanic, and that creates its own issues with digital inclusions where language is also a concern. And if you take a drive up in the community to nearby the Southside community in Asheville, the numbers are even starker. You can see really a disparity here where roughly half of homes don't have a computer and 70%, almost 3/4, don't have broadband service. So that really underscores the importance of digital inclusion to address these disparities that exist in the region. I'll scroll through the plan a little bit to get to some action items that we're outlining as part of this digital inclusion effort. So you take a look at some ideas here. These are all ideas that have been shared earlier. And we're looking to partner through this plan with agencies, governments, nonprofits that are focused on these efforts. Moving on to device access. If you take a look here at this map, these are the percentages of homes without computers in the Land of Sky region. Again, anywhere from 1 in 10 to 1 in 5 homes don't even have a computer. So obviously that impacts an individual's ability to get online. A lot of this clearly impacts students' ability to learn, and you saw a lot of districts in the region move quickly to get one-to-one programs to make sure that students in school could continue learning online during the pandemic. There's also public device access. I'm sitting in a virtual background at the East Asheville Library, and that's another photo of the East Asheville Library. And in Buncombe County, they've had a very innovative program where you can check out books, and now you can also check out devices. You can check out ways to connect. So maybe a home without a child in school that's benefiting from one-to-one programs in schools can still get a computer to get online, because we know that it's not just students that need to get online, it's families, it's individuals of all ages. So there are some action items that we have to increase device access in the region. And finally, we want to focus on growing tech skills as part of digital inclusion. And that's to develop technology support and educational programming that empowers residents to gain skills necessary to participate fully in the digital world. That's everything from helping someone that has no experience getting online or working with computers to building skills, advanced skills to help support the job market and people's opportunities. So here we'll take a look at some action items in skills training, including creating a digital navigator program for the region and serving non-native English speakers. Now, a lot of these activities are already up and running across the region. The plan outlines some successes here in the Land of Sky region. Here in Buncombe County, a collaboration between the school district and Dogwood was a part of this grant to serve Asheville's housing developments with no cost broadband service. And so that's clearly made an impact to make sure that students, when they get home, or they are able to work and do school at home in communities that probably maybe would have trouble affording broadband access. In Henderson County, the school district created a one-to-one program very quickly. They also created a help desk to help students with their tech problems, and they also offered that in Spanish. So that's an excellent example in Henderson County of fulfilling the needs of digital inclusion. In Madison County, to meet the needs of the senior population before the pandemic, students from Mars Hill University would work with seniors in the community at local libraries to help them with their tech issues, anything from sending a picture on their phone or getting an email address. And in Transylvania County, there was a collaboration between an organization that was focused on affordable broadband, and they subsidized individual families' broadband bills, and they also focused on the Hispanic community, recognizing the disparity that exists in devices. So they worked on a device program with El Centro, a Latino-led organization in the region. So as you take a look here, really with this plan, we're focused on continuing to partner with local governments and stakeholders to address their local needs for digital inclusion. And of course, we'd like to thank everyone that was a part of this. Many of you are on this call right now. And thanks to the NC State University Institute for Emerging Issues for supporting this plan with the NC Band grant. So.
Thank you, Paul and Sarah. So we have time for a couple of questions, and I'll take the prerogative of asking, how can people on this call help?
You can take a look at this plan. Mark shared the chat in the chat, the direction. And if you're looking for a program that meets some of the strategies that we outlined in this plan, please reach out to me and I can help look for funding to support your digital inclusion activity.
Other questions?
I see Maggie asked, do you have a sense of how much it will take to fully implement your digital equity plan? Sarah, I'd like to invite you in on this challenging question from Maggie.
That's a good one, Maggie. So some of these are probably more like one-time expenses, anything related to infrastructure. And we've been trying to get that number for a long time. If I just had to pull it out of somewhere to make sure broadband infrastructure was everywhere, it would be in the hundreds of millions of dollars probably, but then we wouldn't keep paying for it. Maybe we'll see that opportunity come to us. And then for other things like ongoing training and tech support for people, I would say that's going to be ongoing funding that either nonprofits or local governments are going to be absorbing. One of the things that we put in this plan was kind of a high-tech center somewhere in the region where we could do a crossover of people who needed very basic tech skills, but integrate them with folks with higher tech skills, like maybe coding and 3D printing. So we've like normalized the need to seek help and put people at different places in their journey in the same room. And something like that would have a lot of ongoing costs plus a significant upfront cost. So I wouldn't know where to put a dollar sign on it, but as we see where the projects lead us, what funding is opportunistic, we fully intend to wear Stacy out in that journey. And we think other funding is coming too. So we didn't hesitate to put some of our big dreams in here, things we never thought were going to happen, because we think now's the time.
Certainly with, go ahead.
I just also would like to say that small asks can make a difference as well. You know, maybe you have a community center that needs a computer and a printer, or a couple computers and a printer, and don't have the funding for that. That can make an impact. It's a small ask, but you know, we're not always talking millions of dollars when, you know, looking for improvements in digital inclusion. And there's a lot of volunteer activity. There's innovative partnerships like the one that I described at Mars Hill University, where students would come and support the senior community. Also, Code for Asheville went to housing developments pre-pandemic to support you know, tech training and just basic tech support for the communities that, as this map outlined, don't have the access, and then that leads to a skills gap. So.
Okay, we need to move on here to keep within our timetable. So thank you so much, Sarah and Paul, for your work. And don't celebrate too vigorously tonight, Paul. Be judicious in what you do. And just a note to everybody, I know that if I was just watching this, I would think, isn't it nice that Land of Sky have two people working on this thing? You should know that Land of Sky does not receive any direct funding for these positions and for the time. And so under Justin Humbry and then Nathan Ramsey, they've kind of pieced together the funding that allows Sarah and Paul to work on these things. And I know the same thing's true with Sarah Thompson at the Southwest Commission. And so this is a little sales pitch to you state people and to others, and that is that at some point we need to help governments have a funding stream for people to work on these digital issues and not just piece it all together. So I know Sarah would be embarrassed that I gave you that sales pitch, but let's move on. But I think it's critical for our future success. We're going to shift gears now and go at the federal scene. And one person that has been active with us over the last 3.5 years is Blair Levin. Blair is a senior fellow with the Brookings Institute. He was former chief of staff at the FCC. He is president of GigU currently and is very instrumental in all of that. Blair came into town 3 years ago to help share what was going on federally. And since then, even more and more activity has occurred and more interest in broadband. And so Blair, thanks for being here, and I'll turn the program over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I wish, as 3 years ago, I could have been with you all. Actually, physically, it's horribly hot and terrible here in DC today, and always enjoy coming to Asheville. I actually want to start by mentioning part of my resume that I'm actually quite proud of, but I think is relevant. Back in the 80s, I was a young lawyer in Raleigh and led the financing of the what is now called the Wall Street Garage in Asheville.
Oh.
And every time I come to Asheville, I always make sure to park there because I want to make sure the bonds are paid off. Actually, I think by now they are. But you know, when I see what happened around that area, because the city fathers had the good sense to realize they needed to put a parking facility there, and the kind of growth and excitement and that brings, the economic activity that it brings, it's really great. And I think what we're talking about now, we're going to look back 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and see the same thing. I want to start in terms of talking about the federal side. By quoting one of my least favorite people in history, but I think he got one thing right. That was Lenin, who said, there are decades where nothing happens and there are weekends where decades happen. And I think when we look back at these 2 years, 2021 and 2022, we're going to see that decades worth of work happened on broadband. I worked with my friend Stag, who's with you all now, and I'd worked with Greg my first stint at the FCC. I came back to the FCC, worked with Stag again on the national broadband plan. We had 3 basic ideas. Number 1, networks everywhere. Number 2, everybody on. Number 3, use the networks to improve how we deliver essential public services, many of which have been mentioned: education, healthcare, job training, etc. That plan came out in 2010. I think there were a lot of good things that came out of it, but fundamentally, Congress spent no money on any of those goals. And if you aren't spending the money, you're not really going to accomplish that much. But and Nate pointed to this, because of what happened with COVID. In March of last year, there was a sudden recognition of, oh my God, we need networks everywhere, we need everybody on, and we need to do a better job of delivering proper services over it. So what Congress, I think by September will have done, it's already done some, and I'll talk about that, but it will have pretty much fully funded what we need to get the first goal, networks everywhere, done. It will have taken major steps toward getting everybody on. And there's the third task of improving how we deliver services, but you got to do the first 2 first. So we have already seen in past legislation that Congress has spent $10 billion to improve affordability. Part of that is through what's referred to as the emergency broadband benefit. You all have a link to that. The second part is what's called the Emergency Connectivity Fund, which is really going through schools, but is designed to help kids break through the homework gap. In addition, in the already passed legislation, Congress put $10 billion directly into capital projects for broadband, though interestingly, the word broadband never appears. Congress is often very weird the way it acts, and that for some reason they couldn't put the word broadband in, but everybody knows that's what it's for. It's going through Treasury. It's done on a formula, and every state gets a certain amount of money. And in addition, there is a $50 billion fund that goes to states and local governments, which has 5 categories of eligible projects. Broadband is one of those eligible projects. It is not going to get the lion's share of that money. There are a lot of uses, I'm sure, that the state has, but you can see that that's significantly more money than we've ever had. But the best is, I think, yet to come. Yesterday, 17 Republican senators joined with the Democrats in moving forward with the bipartisan infrastructure bill. The draft provisions of the broadband portion of that, which have leaked out, call for $40 billion to go to state deployment programs. It also calls for $11.75 billion to go to the emergency broadband fund, and takes out the word emergency, with the implication is we want this to be a permanent fund. But that's a lot more money. In addition, there's $2.5 billion for a digital equity program, including setting up an office in DC, but a lot of the money going to grants. One of the really interesting things about the way this legislation is structured is that in the past, all of the money going to get the infrastructure, that is to say, to deploy to high cost areas, rural areas where market economics don't drive deployment, went through the FCC. The FCC had to raise the money by taxing existing telecommunication services. And in the last few years, used, Nate mentioned this, reverse auction process in which you say, okay, yeah, we have so much money, but who will do this for us? And if we get people to compete, we'll basically take the low bid. There are some advantages to that program. There's some disadvantages, but Congress has decided that instead of going through the FCC, Congress is going to spend its own money and basically give it to governors. So there's going to be now 58 competitive grant programs, because the District of Columbia is not a state, neither is Puerto Rico. We have a few others like Guam, but there's going to be 58 different competitive grant programs for that $40 billion, and that's on top of the money the state already has. So that's an awful lot of money in which the state, and again, we've never had this kind of money before. There are lots of details I could go into about how it's spent, but the most important thing is state leadership. You know, for example, what the law does, and again, this is still in draft form, so it could be changed, but I think I've seen now 3 different drafts and it's pretty much been the same. So I think we're pretty solid with this. The priority is to spend money where there's no network capable of 25.3, but they mean by that 80% of the homes or more don't have 25.3. In other words, if you have 20% of the homes that already do have access, that's okay. But it also gives the states the ability to say to the Department of Commerce, which is overseeing the program, look, in our case, we really want to reach this area. The 80% number doesn't work, and the Commerce Department can waive it. Similarly, anyone who receives the grant is required to offer what's called a low-cost option for low-income people. But the terms of that are very much up to the governor and the Department of Commerce. And I would note that a lot of existing ISPs already do that. But what you see in the program is basically Congress saying, we know we have to solve this problem, but we're not going to solve, we're going to have some broad rules, Treasury in some cases, Commerce in other cases, are going to kind of set standards. But at the end of the day, it's really about the states. And fortunately, you have tremendous leadership. I think, very frankly, lots of people in Washington, including the Treasury Department and Commerce, are looking at North Carolina as one of the leaders, looking at people like Jeff and Nate as having done a tremendous job, and also, frankly, looking at the governor as really demonstrating the kind of what you might think of as comprehensive planning leadership, which I think is incredibly important. Now, there's one barrier that I want to note, which is mapping. The FCC has failed in the last 10 years to get good maps. We could really go down a rabbit hole talking about why that is, but it is what it is. You all have a lot better information probably than the FCC has. I think that's going to be key. I would also note that in the long term on the affordability issue, Congress is calling on the FCC to reform the Universal Service Program. I think they could really use your input into that. But the fundamental message I'll leave you with is, this is the moment, this is the time. We were talking about these things 3 years ago at the conference. Stag and I have been talking about these things for many, many years. Now is the moment where the rubber is going to meet the road. The money is going to be there. And so you really have an opportunity to achieve the kind of visions and goals that you all have had for some time. With that, let me turn it back to you.
Thank you, Blair, for that most exciting report. And we really are on the cusp of a great age for broadband. And I know Sarah told me earlier one should pass on waiting for questions until the panel, but I got to ask you just directly, any advice you would give everybody as far as how to think about the federal dollars and what we can do in preparation for those federal dollars?
Well, there's a lot of things, and frankly, I think, and I give a lot of credit to Jeff and Nate, as well as to the governor. You all have done the preliminary work. A lot of states are way, way behind, but you've been working on this issue for some time. You've never had the kind of money, and you know, I could argue with certain state legislators who denied the governor some of his requests. But the truth is, even if you had fully funded all of the governor's requests, it's much smaller than the amount of money you're about to get. So, you know, 3 different programs are going to be affecting capital projects. Have a comprehensive plan that addresses all the different needs, because North Carolina, which has lots of rural areas with small towns, there's lots of really interesting opportunities to make it work. It's just really about plan beats no plan.
Okay. Thank you, Blair. And with that, you're going to be on the panel here in 1 second, so hang in there. And I think we're now supposed to transition to a panel on state and federal policy. And with that, we have a couple of panelists that will be joining us in addition to Blair. Nate is back for that. We also have joining us Angie Bailey, who is with the State Bio Office. And Angie, we're delighted that Jeff could not be here and that you're here, because we all know, Angie, that you do most of the work in the bio office. So thanks for being here, Angie. And we also have joining us Lisa Fox from the North Carolina Pandemic Relief Organization or office. And also Marquis Drews, who is a NC Pro program officer. And Marquis was with the Golden Leaf Foundation previously. And Marquis, we're delighted to have you join us as well. And I believe, according to the directions I got from Sarah, is we're supposed to make sure that we open this up for other experts that we have to be on the panel if they want to join us. And so to the Walter Johnsons of the world, or the Greg Boats of the world, or others, feel free to be part of this conversation. So Sarah, I'm now going to throw it back to you to kind of MC this conversation about state and federal policy. And as I understand it, the focus is to be pragmatic as far as what we can all do regionally and locally to make some of this stuff happen. And I want to reiterate one thing that Blair mentioned, and that is I was served in the state legislature for 12 years in Michigan, so I follow Michigan with great interest. And I was recently contacted by a friend of mine in Michigan who said, can you tell us what North Carolina is doing on broadband, because you are so far ahead of us here in Michigan. And as I've looked into that, it is true that Governor Cooper and the legislature funding the great program, et cetera, North Carolina really is in good shape compared to the other parts of the country. So with that as kind of an introduction, Sarah, we'll turn it over to you to be the official MC of this panel.
Thanks, Bill. I want to start by letting each of the people on this panel introduce themselves. We heard from Nate and Blair. Angie, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Angie Bailey. I'm with the Broadband Infrastructure Office at NCDIT. I've worked in this space about 20 years, and I just want to say quickly that it's such the amount of energy and enthusiasm from Western North Carolina over the years, even the past 20 years in this space, you know, from citizens and from the COGS and from your local governments is, you know, it's really unparalleled. So we thank you for all your leadership in this space as well.
Thank you for all the help you've given us. The broadband office has been critical in support of our work over the years. We're eternally grateful. Lisa, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm Lisa Fox with the North Carolina Pandemic Recovery Office, and I am the lead for our reporting and guidance team in the office. And we try to provide support and give as much capacity as we can to people who have questions about how to use these funds, what are eligible uses, what are the responsibilities. We administered the coronavirus relief funds, which many of you may be familiar with, and now we are moving into the space of the state and local fiscal recovery funds, which Nate has talked about today, and Nate and many of the panelists have talked about today. So,
and Marquis, will you introduce yourself?
Yeah, Good morning, everybody. My name is Marquise Cruz. I'm a policy analyst over at NC Pro working with Lisa, and I'm the person positioning myself to learn more and to be the point person for some of these infrastructure conversations to help answer questions and provide guidance to communities. So being in meetings like this is great to really hear a lot of feedback from professionals on what's going on at different levels so that I can really be in a good position to help communities as they have questions moving forward.
Thank you. So Lisa and Marquise, I think one of the questions we get a lot, and we're getting a lot, is what do you see as the biggest barriers and opportunities in funding for broadband out of this pot?
I would say for me, the biggest barrier, and I know some of you may know some of this a lot more in depth than I do, but just some of the statutory requirements within the state. Some of those statutory requirements kind of limit what communities can do directly with this funding that's coming through in the time that we have the funding. So that's one of the biggest barriers I see, but big opportunity is just there is time. So folks have opportunities to kind of think outside of the box and to try to apply these funds towards the areas that they see can help their communities and that are eligible.
Lisa, did you have anything to add to that?
One of the things that we really saw in coronavirus relief funds and in discussions about broadband access is that there is a lot of focus, understandably, on extending infrastructure and digging projects. But there are a lot of North Carolinians who really can't afford broadband access, even if they're in areas with really good broadband service. And so that's something that I think remains on my mind and remains a barrier. And I think the new funding is designed to address some of those issues of equity and access. But I think one thing that I want to keep in mind and hope everyone keeps in mind is that it's not enough to simply have broadband build out if people can't actually afford to pay that monthly rate to access it. And so that, and then we also discovered that there are a number of communities who, in addition to having difficulty affording broadband, lack digital literacy to even start to use broadband the way that we are now starting to all need to use it. And so addressing needs in those specific communities is also something that is on all of our minds as we move forward.
I caught something in Nate's presentation earlier, and then I also caught something in this the Senate infrastructure package from last night that was very interesting, where it is referencing at kind of a new speed. So we've been harping on that for a long time, 25.3, 10.1, 50.50. All these numbers have been danced around. There seems to be a general consensus that it needs to be higher than 25.3. And I read twice in the last 48 hours, 120, which seems to me to say that there's a need for what STAG has been saying for a long time. We need future-proof technology. We don't need to be investing in bare minimum only to fix that in a few years. Nate and Blair, I'd like to invite you to respond to that, why that number and where we're at with meeting that goal.
Yeah, I'll just say amen. I mean, I think that has been one of our challenges with the current GREAT grant program, to be frank, is that the scoring system in statute allows us to make state investments that could be too slow to provide much ongoing use. Now, let me differentiate. I mean, there were projects in the very first round, and Angie, please call me if I oversimplify anything, but there were projects that qualified under the statute that were in the 10.1 range, right, in terms of speed, and that's not where we want to be. Now, DIT is technology neutral for broadband expansion. We believe that to cover everyone in the state with high-speed internet access, you're going to need a broad range of technologies, including fiber, including satellite. I saw there was a question about satellite in the chat that we can circle back to at some point, including fixed wireless, including other new innovative technologies that a lot of really interesting small North Carolina companies are experimenting with right now. We need an all of the above approach. That said, we've got to be building where we can with for that long-term kind of future-proof use. So, you know, in one hand, the Treasury guidance that Blair mentioned earlier kind of ties our hands with that 120 minimum threshold, but I think it's doing us a long-term service, especially with the scalability requirement for 100 symmetrical speed. We're going to need all of these technologies and all of these providers to play, but the modern requirements of, especially as we've learned in the pandemic, of learning at home, working at home, the telemedicine as referenced, those are not requirements that can currently be met at the minimum of the FCC definition. So we really, and I should say at 120 isn't future-proof. 120 is a really good place for us to be right now and a tremendous improvement from what most of the state has. But future-proof is far exceeds that, right? And we've got to make sure that we can keep growing and catching up. Blair, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll quickly add that there are two different metrics that often get confused, and you're trying to solve different problems. The 25.3 is a metric which determines the eligibility of an area. That is to say, an area is eligible to get funds if it doesn't have a provider who provides more than 25.3. But you don't fund just to that, right? You fund, this is kind of the future-proof notion. The second question is what networks are eligible to receive the funding? That's different than geography. So the initial democratic versions said you have to offer 100, and that would effectively mean a fiber solution. Wireless interests came to Congress and said, let us compete. We can do it a lot cheaper. We can do it a lot faster. My guess is that North Carolina and pretty much every other state is going to favor fiber solutions, which mean far more than 120. But as they get to the end of their expenditures, if they start to run out of money, when they look at the overall program, they might say, well, in a few places, we're going to have to do this, and maybe there's an advantage because it can happen faster or whatever and stuff like that. But this is, again, it's going to be a state decision. You're going to be deciding how to do it. But my guess is, and I mean this somewhat whimsically, most governors would rather, cut the ribbon for a fiber project than a wireless project. Not only are the visuals better, it's the long-term ability of fiber to basically do whatever we can conceive of. And so I think most of the money will be spent on fiber.
Blair, I should just say in North Carolina, we welcome ribbon cuttings of all types first. but I do think that it's worth noting that Governor Cooper's plan specifically includes other funding sources to give us the flexibility to invest in some of the projects that you're talking about. We want fixed wireless to be a part of the solution. We need fixed wireless to be a part of the solution. We need satellite, and to kind of circle back to the question in chat, the availability of satellite services in North Carolina is pretty limited. Affordability of equipment is a major challenge for us, but we think this industry is going to grow. We've gotten a little bit of seed funding from the General Assembly for a satellite grant program. Right now, we don't really have eligible participants in that grant program. So that hasn't gone anywhere yet, but we're ready and we're excited about that possibility. So Blair's absolutely right. I think you need all of those, and the governor's plan includes all of them.
We've got a question here about how the state's working with the school systems on the ECF program. Do you have any information on that?
The LEAs, the local education agencies, the schools have to apply directly for that ECF program. I know that our North Carolina Business Committee for Education, I almost lost the proper noun there. Our Business Committee for Education has been working with, which is a nonprofit education group that works closely with a lot of private sector entities and funders. That nonprofit's housed in the governor's office. That group has been working closely with LEAs to kind of work on awareness issues and help encourage participation. But at the end of the day, that's a Department of Public Instruction. That's DPI territory. So we're trying to help where we can and encourage participation. It's a little bit out of our hands, though. Angie, anything I missed in that?
No, I think that's correct. It's just an E-rate window that's available that I think it's the applications would have to be in the next couple of weeks. And I think one of the main things being stressed is just to be really, careful, cautious. It is E-rate. There's a lot of rules, but we hope that folks will take advantage.
And let me add to that, if this group knows of schools that need any help, need any advice, or just want to be connected to whether it's DPI or other in-state experts, please send them our way. I'll throw my email address in the chat here, but we're happy to work with everybody. Our primary bias here is just more, right? More broadband, more access, more affordability. So please send folks our way if you know them.
I'm going to say if we didn't get to I'm going to take one more question. If we didn't get to yours, we'll follow up with you later. But this question I think is pretty relevant. Is the 65 billion, the 600 million, the 1.2 billion, is that going to be enough money? And what can Western North Carolina planners such as Southwest, Land to Sky, local governments be doing to set us up right now?
I'll jump back on this one unless somebody has gotten tired of hearing me talk, so others can interrupt. But, I think that the $1.2 billion plan the governor's presented, that gets us to 98% of households covered in the next 5 years with high-speed internet access. 98% is not as good a number as 100, so we're excited to see Congress making additional investments here. Blair mentioned, and I want to hit this on several points. Blair mentioned earlier the benefits that we see in North Carolina having the right structures in place to take advantage of federal funding. I think the great work that Angie and her team have been doing, building the GREAT grant and its next iterations that I think will help even more people, put us in a really good position to take advantage of that funding. And that's not just true on the infrastructure side of it. The governor on July 1st announced that as a part of our new effort at DIT, our new division, we're creating the first Office of Digital Equity and Literacy in the country, specifically because, as Blair mentioned, we expect to see additional federal investment in state digital literacy programming, and we want to have that capacity built out so that we can help move that funding toward great regional and local projects, Sarah, like the one that you've described today. So, I think we've got the right structures in place to move quickly in between what the counties have brought in from ARPA, what the states brought in from ARPA, and then hopefully additional federal investment in the very near future. I really think we can close this digital divide once and for all.
Yeah, and let me just add that while I don't know the specifics of Western North Carolina, I'll just note that in 2017, a very distinguished expert in the field wrote a memo that said to get fiber everywhere in the United States would basically take about $80 billion of capital. He said we currently only have it to about 86%. To get from 86% to 98% would take 40, and to get from 98 to 100 would take another 40. So what that shows you is that, the last 2% are much, much more expensive. So if Congress funds the 40, as I think they will, and they've already funded 10, and they've already funded, given states the ability to use some of that 350. We're definitely in the area where we can get to the 98%, maybe the 99% with fiber. So whether North Carolina, I mean, I know Western North Carolina is particularly tricky because of the geography of the mountains and all that. But we should be able, as Nate just said, really be able to close this gap once and for all, and hopefully make it affordable for everybody to get everybody devices.
And that's a great spot for us to bring us to the final section. And at this point, I'm going to ask Sarah, and I'm so relieved that I'm seeing on the chat that Stag Newman is sharing some thoughts with us. I was worried about Stag's health, but Stag, I'm glad to see you're fully engaged with this. Sarah, bring us on home here with the next steps from Land of Sky and your work, and then the announcement that's referred to here in the chats.
Right. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, our presenters, and all of you who dedicated this time. We really appreciate it. I was going to give a bigger update as to all the things we're working on, but the one thing I want to make sure you know is we partnered with the state Department of Natural and Cultural Resources on some funding to get spent by the end of the year. This is part of their Student Connect program, and they had a hard time spending money in the West. We can be tricky, but they recognized that we were the ones to do it. So they have handed a pot of money over to us and Southwest Commission to do student-related rural broadband projects. That could be small extensions, which is something we're very excited about, hotspot lending, digital literacy access, training, public Wi-Fi, all that kind of stuff is under that. And we have a link for you. If Sydney can get that up there, you want to put basic information about your project idea, send that to us. We want to know that anyway. So even if we can't get it in this round, we're expecting more money to come in. So this is going to be a first come, first serve basis. We'll help you develop the project. We're going to try and move that quickly because we need to get those done by the end of this year.
And how much money is that, Sarah?
We have approximately $400,000 to spend across the whole Western Territory. So it'll be about $200,000 per cog.
Right. That's exciting. Thank you.
Very exciting.
And I think we reached the end of the program. I just want to officially thank Sarah and Paul and everybody that's worked on this over the last 5 years. We've come a long ways, and as has been mentioned, we're really just at a critical turning point, a tipping point, if you will, towards achieving these goals that we've worked on. So we appreciate everybody's hard work on this, and stay tuned. I suspect we'll be having a similar session in a month or two once the state gets their act together and the federal regulations get all written, and we're able to see how the states, I think about it just sort of staggering the kind of money that's going to be available here. And the state's going to have to figure out how to do it in a rational way, and we're here to help them. So with that, Sarah, is there anything else you want to say in conclusion?
No, stay tuned. We'll send a follow-up email, get you those slides from today and some of the links of the presentations.
All right, so be good and do well.